In our politics lead now, early in the Trump administration, many Republicans found solace and comfort in the fact that the president had surrounded himself with three well-respected generals. Since then, National Security Advisor General H.R. McMaster has been shown the door. The influence of Chief of Staff and former Marine General John Kelly is said to be waning. And now there are questions about how much President Trump is listening to or even looping in his Secretary of Defense, retired Marine General James Mattis. CNN's Barbara Starr reports on how this division might impact the nation's safety and security.
It's become increasingly clear that President Trump and Defense Secretary James Mattis have very different realities. President Trump says it's going just fine with North Korea's denuclearization.
They stopped everything that you'd want them to stop, and they blew up sites where they test and do the testing.
But when Mattis is asked about denuclearization,
at the very front end of the process, the detailed negotiations have not begun. I wouldn't expect that at this point.
Secretary Mattis looks at things, either they are true or they are not true.
Leaving Mattis scrambling to manage the president's off-the-cuff ideas, like forming a new military department.
I'm hereby directing the Department of Defense and Pentagon to immediately begin the process necessary to establish a Space Force as the sixth branch of the armed forces. That's a big statement.
This, as you know, is going to require legislation and a lot of detailed planning, and we have not yet begun.
What has happened to the Trump who loved his generals?
That makes him very happy, General. You know that, right?
During a recent cabinet meeting, as Mr. Trump spoke on his political agenda, it did not escape the Pentagon's attention that Mattis kept his eyes down during much of the meeting, leaving questions about his body language. Lieutenant General H.R. McMaster forced out as National Security Advisor. And Chief of Staff retired four-star John Kelly has had his run-ins with the president, including suggesting Mr. Trump's views on a border wall at one point may have changed. Is Mattis at risk of the president being tired of him?
Secretary Mattis has to be very careful to read the signs as much as he can as to whether or not the president feels comfortable. Secretary Mattis is going to have to watch and see if the president expresses that even in a subtle way.
Now, many congressional Republicans still very strongly support the defense secretary, and they point out he has one major victory with President Trump. He got increased defense spending through Congress, something Mr. Trump wanted badly, Jake, so he could say that the U.S. military is more ready to fight today than it has ever been before. A big plus for Mattis on the record books with the president. Jake?
All right, Barbara Starr at the Pentagon for us. Let's bring back our political panel. And Bill Kristol, you're such a fan of Mattis. You already said you were a fan of Mattis earlier in the show without even knowing this was coming. Are you concerned?
I am. You know, Charles Krauthammer died late last week as a good friend of mine, a friend of yours. And his last column in the Washington Post before he went in for the operation, from which he never really came back, 10 months ago was on it was in praise of the guardrails, and the argument was President Trump is a bad president, a dangerous president in certain ways, but the guardrails are holding up, the institutions are holding, and thank God we have a constitutional republic with laws and processes. And one of them he cited actually was the military, which Trump had tweeted, you know, fire the transgender troops, and Secretary Mattis had said, I'm sorry, there's a process for separating troops, it has to be lawful, and he cited that as an example. He said it's ironic that we're looking at generals as guardians of our democracy against Trump, but that's the fact. I think Mattis has done that in all kinds of ways, and I worry about these reports that Trump is getting impatient with him, and that would be McMaster's departure was bad. Mattis's would also be bad. One of the theories going on, I read in NBC earlier today, is that President Trump, according to sources that talked to that news network, thinks that Mattis looks down on him, and that's one of the reasons that he's not looping Mattis more into the process.
Yeah, and what we know from the president is that he likes to be in a position of authority and of power, and Donald Trump likes to be the ultimate authority, and he only wants to seek counsel when he asks for your counsel, but you need to be on board when he says you want to be on board. And we know from all reports that that is in fact not Secretary Mattis. I remember when everyone said that it was John Kelly and McMaster and Secretary Mattis that were going to, you know, keep everything together, and the great pillars seem to be falling. And I think it's dangerous that we expect outside individuals to corral in a very just off the rails, unhinged president. And so when the guardrails are gone, then what happens? Who then will we wait to swoop in to save us? At some point, we can't rely on Secretary Mattis or John Kelly. I haven't been relying on John Kelly. He failed us a long time ago. But we have to hold Donald Trump himself accountable, and a co-equal branch is the only thing that can do that. Ding, 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 Congress.
Well, Congress could be more aggressive in its oversight responsibility, let's put it that way. What do you make of all this and Mattis not being part of big decisions? There was obviously the announcement President Trump made after meeting with Kim Jong-un that they were no longer going to do military exercises with South Korea. Mattis apparently had to be informed of that after the fact.
Part of me takes all of this with a little bit of a grain of salt, because how long have we been talking about how Jeff Sessions is just one day away from being out of the cabinet, or that Scott Pruitt is embattled, and maybe this is the story that will be the reason why he has to step down as EPA administrator? How long have we been having stories about how John Kelly is on the outs in the Oval Office? I mean, I feel like we've been having that talk for a long time. And so in some ways, I mean, even when it came to the former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, it was a long time of the Trump doesn't like Rex Tillerson. He's been out of the loop. It was months and months and months of that before finally the moment came where he was let go. So it wouldn't surprise me if this is really happening, if it's quite a long time before Mattis actually does exit the White House.
But the bigger picture question is, I mean, the hope of people even who were great Trump skeptics, reluctant Trump voters, was he will grow in office. He's new. Remember the first month or two, he's a businessman. He doesn't understand Washington. He doesn't understand you can't just order things. Here he is standing up last week after 18 months in office. I hereby order that there be a Space Force established immediately. Congress legislates the structure of the armed services. I mean, he's learned nothing, and if anything, he's behaving a little bit more. He's behaving a little bit worse.